This is Christian Book Blurb, brought to you by author and songwriter Matt McChlery. Get a behind-the-scenes glimpse into the lives of some of your favourite Christian authors, hear about their books and faith. Also, why not check out my website, mattmcclery.com. This episode is sponsored by St Andrew's Literature Festival, which is a Christian literature festival being held in Great Missenden here in the UK on the 21st and the 22nd of June. Find out more and get your tickets now from stalitfest.co.uk. Well, hello and welcome to the Christian Book Blurb, the podcast that likes to encourage you in your discipleship one book at a time, as we meet some amazing Christian authors and learn about their books, their lives, and their faith. Well, I'm your host, Matt McChlery. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome aboard. And on today's show, I'm going to be talking about how to build a healthy marriage with the authors Claire and Steve Musters. Well, hi, Claire and Steve. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Hi.
It's really good to have you both with us today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I must say that this is the first time I've had a husband and wife team who've written a book together that I've interviewed on the podcast. So that's really exciting.
Oh, I hope that goes well then.
Yeah, so do I. So first of all, we're talking about marriage and you're a husband and wife team. So I guess the most obvious question to ask first is, how long have you been married?
Well, we've been married 30 years, and that was last year, wasn't it? We celebrated our 30th anniversary.
31 this summer.
And we met as teenagers. So we've known each other for a very, very long time.
I'm not going to tell you quite how.
The title of the episode mentions building a marriage, which implies effort and hard work. So in your 30 years of experience, has your marriage required hard work, or has it been fairly easy and plain sailing?
Yes, well, I think that's why we ended up writing a book, because it was very difficult. And yes, your title's talking about building a healthy marriage. And I think for us, we didn't really get the chance to build healthy foundations, which is why we ran into difficulties fairly early on.
Yeah, I mean, basically, although we knew each other for a very long time before getting married, when we finally did take the plunge, my work situation meant that I just wasn't around. I was in the music industry. I was working 7 days a week, very, very, very little time off. And so we went straight into married life, almost with Claire as basically, in effect, being single. So
yeah, I can remember my mum sitting me down and saying, "Do you really want to do this?" And she absolutely adored Steve. She said that he was like the son that she'd never had. But she could already see that it was a real strain once Steve started working in the studio. And I said, well, I fell in love with him years ago. It's a bit late for that. But we didn't do things like marriage prep, because I said, I'm not going to go to that by myself. I would feel really awkward. And so, yes, we went into marriage having been best friends for years, but not having done that hard work of what happens when the rubber hits the road. And so when it did, it was really tricky. And we had a decade of struggle where I would say probably a couple of times a year, I can't keep doing this. And yet somehow we couldn't see any other way forward. And so we just kind of knuckled down and carried on until I just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, I suppose it was just that sense of burying your head in the sand, thinking, we will get through this somehow. It will be okay. There will be a better day, without actively doing anything about it. So there was a lot of complacency, a lot of unrealistic expectations as well. We were very young when we got married. You just turned 20, hadn't you? And I wasn't that much older. So there was, unrealistic expectations leading to unmet expectations, leading to disappointment, frustration, and all the other things actually became a very unhealthy mix.
Yeah, and I think we'd got married so young, we were the only people in our friendship group that were married. And so we used to look at all of the married couples at church and think that they had everything together. And in the times when I did say to Steve, we need to talk to somebody about it, He didn't really want to because he's quite a private person. Very ironic now that he's written a book about all of this. But I quickly shut that idea down. So actually, I didn't really want to go to people that we didn't know that well and admit that we were really, really struggling. And so that went on for a decade until it came to a crunch point. And we ended up separating just at a time where we were beginning to help start a new church. So there are huge, big reasons, and it was all very difficult. And I did actually leave with somebody else who was part of that church plant. And fortunately, God dealt with that within a couple of weeks, which I say fortunately now was incredibly painful. But Steve was the first person that I called once he had left, and which was quite telling. I think I'd already realised within those couple of weeks that I really missed Steve. But of course, there was a lot of pain and hurt, and we couldn't just jump straight back in. So Steve actually moved me down to my parents. So I was nearing my 30th birthday. And thought I'd lost everything. I was a book editor, and I just started writing Christian books. And I thought, well, I can't do that anymore. I'm a complete hypocrite and all of that stuff. So I've lost my husband, my home, my work, my church. So they're never going to let me back in there. So I felt my whole world was in tatters. And that's at that point, God just really met me and affirmed me and just poured his love out on me. And was doing a work in Steve at the same time, which he can talk about. But it was from that point where I felt God's unconditional love. And I then had to work through all the hurt and all the issues for us then to think, are we at a place where we feel like we can rebuild? And it was at that point that the hard work of building some healthy foundations started.
Foundations that should have been in there right at the very beginning.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that part of your story with us. And I just want to say, for the benefit of our listeners, that you can read a whole lot more about the story that Steve and Claire have just been starting to share in their book called Grace-Filled Marriage, Strengthened and Transformed Through God's Redemptive Love. And I just wanted to say, having read the book, that I really appreciate the fact that you don't often get Christian books on marriage where they talk about the hard stuff and like the authors have actually lived through it. It's usually look at this picture perfect kind of marriage, here it is, this is what you need to do to keep it. But you really, no holes barred, really. You tell it like it is.
It's one of the reasons why we wanted to write it, because in our experience, when we were looking around for books, I mean, there are some great books on marriage out there, but as you say, a lot of them are just like this ideal that seemed incredibly kind of almost like a fantasy. Will we ever get to that point? And I think one of the reasons, as I said, we wrote that book was to actually give an honest, personal, I suppose, account that, yes, marriage is absolutely beautiful. It is the most wonderful God-given gift, but it is really hard work. And we do face challenges in life, and we need to be incredibly honest and open about them. I wasn't at the time, which obviously, as Claire said, led to a whole load of difficulties. But I think if we can be transparent, if we can be honest, if we can talk about our challenges in our relationships, then that goes a huge long way to being strengthened and being equipped.
And I mean, as you all know, the book's not just our story. That's kind of like the starting point. And we've invited other contributors in because we know this is a very specific story. But there are also general principles in there that we think are really relevant for any marriage. But we also ask people that living with chronic illnesses, living with a mental health illness, all sorts of different coming together from two different cultures. There's all sorts of different things. And so hopefully a personal story will also resonate with readers as well. But I'd written this story from my side at the beginning of a different book called Taking Off the Mask, which it was at the point where I walked back into church after we decided that we were going to make a go of things. And probably because Steve had been the first person I'd called, I'd got that over with pretty quickly. And I knew that he was still there for me. But we obviously had to journey and to have counselling, etc., with all of that. But walking back inside the church, I had no idea whether they would accept me. I had no idea how different individuals were going to respond to me. And at that point, I was like, can I really do this? But their love and their care and their community was just breathtaking and really showed me God's love in a new way. That wasn't easy. I mean, there were times where God would say to me, keep on sharing. And I would say, I can't, nobody else is doing it at this level. And he said to me, I want you to stay as vulnerable as you are right now. And that took me on a journey of learning more about authenticity and why we're not truly honest and open and real with each other in church. So I went on a journey with that and ended up writing a book about all those reasons why we hide from one another. But it's been a beautiful journey, difficult, but I mean, just a few months ago, that same church, Steve now pastors, and we've just, a few months ago, celebrated our 20th anniversary as a church. And so it is really lovely to see how God has transformed all of that as well. And we've learned as a community what it means to be really authentic with one another.
That's really obviously why we called it grace-filled marriage, because every step of the way we've known God's grace, just his care, his love, the way he can turn situations that seem such a mess, a mess of our own making, and yet use it for his glory and for the benefit of others. And obviously that's the motivation behind sharing our story, but also just the way we're seeing it shaped so many other people's lives as well. Just it's his grace.
Another thing I really appreciate about the book is, yes, you sort of cover certain principles that are really important in a marriage, but it's not like a textbook. It all comes through story and narrative and real life. So it's almost like a memoir, and kind of this is what we've learned through life, and this is what we found is important. So yes, if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in the book Grace-Filled Marriage, it is a different kind of book than you might be expecting on marriage, and I think it's really good. Speaking of the book, let's just look at a couple of things within it. So one of the chapters looks at, it's called Grace Takes Responsibility, and it's the idea that of getting married, you do that to find fulfillment or completeness, and you explain why this is a myth. What can you tell us about this?
You go first?
Well, I think for me, because I hadn't done any marriage prep, and as I said, I was very young, I had a lot of romantic notions about what marriage was going to be like. And then I woke up very quickly to the reality because I was very much on my own. But I think I had kind of made a lot of assumptions about what Steve was going to do and what my role would have been. And I think I kind of spiraled into disappointment because those expectations weren't met. And I did wrestle with God about it all, but I think probably I did get on and just do things, but I don't think I fully understood that actually he wasn't there to complete me. He wasn't there to be the person who was responsible for my own walk with God. That's down to me. And actually, I think sometimes we can go into marriage thinking, well, everything will be rosy once I've got my lifelong partner. But actually, when you come and live closely with each other, obviously, we didn't spend a lot of time together, but when we did, we probably saw the worst of each other because Steve was coming back after the most ridiculous amount of hours at work, utterly exhausted. And I'd been waiting and waiting and waiting with all these expectations of what it was going to be like and all these things I wanted to do. And then it was an argument waiting to happen before we'd even got home. And so there were all those expectations there. And I've completely lost my thread of what I was saying. So do you want to jump in?
I was literally just going to say, so often you mentioned about these romantic kind of ideals, and obviously there is wonderful romance and beauty in marriage, but the truth is, we use that phrase so often, you complete me. We talk about my other half. But of course, marriage isn't about two halves becoming whole. Obviously the Bible teaches us that we're complete in Christ, not in our partner. So it's two wholes becoming one in flesh. And that's the difference. And I think so often when we're looking to our partner to kind of fill our gaps, actually, we're kind of, in one sense, it's taking the place of what ultimately God should be in our own lives. He should be the one who completes us. We're two whole, complete people, but, obviously through marriage, we become one. We are better together as a team. So I think however romantic it sounds, you complete me. Ultimately, the gospel says Jesus completes us, but he then brings us together to one.
And I have remembered what I was going to say.
Oh, good.
When you are up close with somebody, when you are living with them, you get to see the best of the person that you love, but you also get to see the worst. And you do begin to rub each other up the wrong way. There'll be certain niggles of their behavior and yours. And actually, what are you going to do about that? Or how do you take responsibility for yourself? How do you take responsibility for the way that you might be behaving, that there might not be anything wrong, but it's causing upset to your partner? Or how do you respond if you're getting upset and you look at, is this really something that we need to be arguing about? Or is this just something that I need to lay down my opinion about and just get used to? And so there's all those kind of things that you need to deal with when you're living with somebody day by day. And so it's keeping a check of your attitudes and your heart, because you can go into marriage, hopefully full of romantic love. And sometimes there can be some disillusionment when reality hits, and you think, and there is that, I'm in this for the long haul. So what do I need to do to my heart attitudes, and how do I prefer my partner? How do I show love and care in a practical way on a day-to-day when you're doing your own thing? You both got to rush out to work, or you're looking after kids, or whatever, on the daily grind. How are you responsible for yourself and your actions?
And so often our default is to jump to, how do I change my partner? How do I make them a lot more compliant to my way of thinking and my way of doing things? And as Claire said, we've got to take responsibility. Actually, ultimately, our responsibility is for our response to these things. So we can change ourselves, and through that, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think I put this in the book, actually. My mum once said to me, because she was a Christian, she's passed away now, but she was a Christian. My dad wasn't, and still isn't. And it caused quite a lot of tension at times. And so she used to pray to God, please change him, because he used to be quite angry about the fact that she was a Christian. And then God turned around to her one day and said, no, you need to be praying that I change your heart. And when she said that to me, I was like, ooh, I don't like that very much, but it's so true.
Yeah, and leading on from that, really, there's another chapter that I think is really important. I mean, they're all important, but I picked up on this one. Grace is dying to self. And it kind of follows on from that thought that you've just mentioned to us there. So how can selfishness damage relationships? And how can dying to self help us?
Well, and again, I think, again, our natural default is to look to a relationship for what we can get out of it. And so often in culture, in the world around us, it's like, the moment I stop getting out of this relationship what I need, what I want, then I'm out of here. So it's all about my needs, my wants. And I think the whole beauty of marriage is that sacrificial love, the giving of oneself to another. Ultimately, we believe marriage is a beautiful reflection of Christ and his church. And that command, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. It's that mutual submission and surrender to one another, giving ourselves to one another, that is so countercultural, so against our own nature, but ultimately we do it in the grace of God, and that transforms, even the most mundane situations when we model that.
Yeah, I mean, if you truly believe that your marriage is a mission field, that actually you are on mission together, that God has brought you together, there will be times where you might want to do something, and actually you have to ask yourself, am I doing this from selfish ambition? Is this building us and what we feel God's called us to do? Is this maybe a part of that God has asked me specifically to do? And then maybe you could be praying and supporting one another, but it might just be that actually this is just something that I would like to run after, and you have to lay that down. I think learning to prefer the other is a shift of mindset. As Steve said, our culture, we are fed constantly to be about ourselves. It's all I-centric. So it is very countercultural to think in this way. But I think you end up the beauty of it is the more that you lay down your life and give to the other, the more you flourish and feel fulfilled.
It's changing that narrative to I'm not flourishing here to how can I make my partner flourish? I think it's just shifting that mindset, and it's a lifelong lesson. And you know, we'll put our hands up. We're still learning this. We are rubbish at this so many times, but it's just that shift in mindset, that different narrative, internal narrative. How can I make my partner truly flourish?
And for me, the whole thing about marriage and God and Christian books about marriage and all this kind of thing is the whole thing that marriage is God's idea.
Yeah.
And actually, if we want to get it right, we need to follow what the creator of marriage says about it. And so even if it flies in the face of what culture is telling us, it might seem weird or difficult or whatever, but actually by doing what God says about it, because he designed it and he created it, he knows how it's supposed to work. So by following what God's saying about marriage is surely the best way to go. Just before we head to the break, I've got a couple of questions for you, almost like I don't know, top tips, really. Top tips. So let's imagine that you're speaking to some of our listeners today who are couples who are just about to get married. What's a marriage top tip you can give to them?
I'd say straight off, if they know of any marriage preparation course going in the area, please do sign up for it. It just really helps that conversation, those early conversations about, baggage that you're bringing into that relationship, sorting it out beforehand. We've all got baggage. We've all got, different expectations. And the other thing I'd say is also just start talking about the vision you have for your life together. Just making sure that you guys are on the same page.
I would say don't stay in a romantic bubble. Cultivate friendships with people that you trust, maybe people slightly further down the line than you that you can be open and honest with, and who will support you in prayer, but also practical wisdom as well. Because we can start off thinking our partner's absolutely perfect. And then, as I said, the reality hits. You need people that can speak in positively, can speak in encouragement, but also help you, that people that you feel safe to talk to when those inevitable times where things aren't quite so easy. We are part of God's church. We are community because we need one another's support, and not to be scared of cultivating close friendships as a couple.
And to commit themselves to pray for you as well.
Yeah, that's really good. How about some top tips for any listeners who might be many years into their marriage already? They've been married for a while. What advice would you give to them?
Again, straight from the off, I'd just say be very, very aware of complacency settling in. It's very, very easy for to get in the daily grind of life, just to allow complacency for one another to creep in. So be on the alert for that.
I would say it doesn't matter how many years we've been married, we can always work at our marriage. And there's always more that we can do. So every time we do marriage prep, or we do these marriage MOTs with couples like 6 months down the line after they've got married, and suggest they do it each year, just have a series of questions you can ask yourselves. Are we still on the same page? Are we still pursuing one another and God in the same way we were a year ago? What's our vision for the next 5 years? All those kind of things as well. Make sure you're still having fun together.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just think, are we still walking side by side, or has life got so busy that we're kind of veering off into our own individual lives, and find ways to bring yourselves back together?
Giving yourself time and the permission to ask those deeper questions.
Really helpful. Thank you. And finally, the last top tip is for any of our listeners who might have experienced a breakdown in their relationship or marriage. It might be really tough at the minute, or maybe they've already gone through a divorce or something like that. What advice can you give them?
If their marriage is completely broken down and they're divorced, the first thing I want to say is there is no condemnation in Christ. And he is the one, as Steve's already said, who completes us. And so I don't want you to hear what we're not saying, that if your marriage is broken down, you're a failure. We've been through that. God in his grace has restored it, but it could so easily have gone a different way.
Yeah.
And we have close friends and family that it has done. So I want to say that from the off.
Yeah.
But I would also say we had to get to the place separately that we were willing to work hard at this, and we're willing to, first and foremost, 100% give ourselves in submission to Christ. So you need to do that for yourself. You can't obviously make your partner do that, but get yourself. It's about being humble before God, isn't it? So make sure you are right with God. And then, I mean, Steve can tell from his experience, he was in that place where he was ready to fight for our marriage straight away. I was carrying a lot of pain and wasn't right there at that point, but God told you just to stand firm and keep praying.
Yeah, I mean, it's an excruciatingly, painfully long time when Claire was down with her parents. As Claire said, I wanted to kind of speed things up. Let's go for it. Let's work at it. Let's put these foundations into place. But I had to learn actually to give Claire the space and the time she needed without the pressure. Just her and God work through it herself before we could even begin that sense of counseling and reconciliation. Forgiveness obviously plays a massive part in that journey, but certainly it was that sense of giving her the space that she needed. It obviously takes two to make a marriage work.
And actually on the back of that, something I would like to say is, as Christians, we can be far too quick to push people back together. Oh, you've had problems, you need to be together because God has brought you together. And yes, that is true. But actually, there may well need to be time and space that they need to work on things separately first. And I had so many people say to me, you just need to come back to Steve. And the person that I was willing to talk to and who we got counsel with individually and together was the person who acknowledged where I was at and just said, you are carrying so much pain and so much hurt. You need to work through that before God, before you can even consider whether there is a future in your marriage. So I think it's really important that we are honest with where people are at and give them that time and space and support when needed.
That's so good. That's so good. Thank you so much for all that really helpful advice. Don't forget, you can pick up your own copy of Grace-Filled Marriage by Claire and Steve Musters, and wherever you get your Christian books from. We will be back to chat with Steve and Claire just after these, so join us in a few minutes. Based in the beautiful village of Great Missenden, the birthplace of St. Andrew's Bookshop, the St. Andrew's Christian Literature Festival is happening for the first time on Friday the 21st and Saturday the 22nd of June. They will be hosting many of the UK's most loved Christian authors, some of which have been interviewed here on the Christian Book Blurb podcast, including Kathy Madavan, Andy Bannister, Fiona Castle, Bob Hartman, Paul Carenza, Paula Gooder, Tola Dolfisher, Amy Boucher-Pye, Patrick Regan, and many, many more. Visit their website, stalitfest.co.uk, to get tickets, as well as to find out more about the programme. Visit stalitfest.co.uk today. If you enjoy listening to this podcast, you can help keep it on the web. All you've got to do is buy me a coffee. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/Matt McChlery to make a donation. There is a link in this episode's show notes. So go on, buy me a coffee today and help this podcast to keep supporting Christian books and authors. Hello, welcome back to Christian Book Blurb, and I'm chatting with Claire and Steve Musters about their book Grace-Filled Marriage, and we were chatting a lot about that before the break. But what we like to do after the break, Claire and Steve, is to get to know the authors a little bit better. Now, let's be honest, you have been putting your hearts on your sleeve for us already, which is fantastic. But it's mostly been in the context of your relationship and marriage, which is what the book's about. So, that's what we've been focusing on. But what about other things? And, what do you do for fun?
What do we do for fun?
What's fun, they say.
Because we kind of lead a church. It's so busy, but it is also so important to make time to have fun. we love getting out into the country. We love just, although we live in Sutton, it's a London borough, but at least the Surrey Hills are just down the road. We can get in the car and go out in the country. I find that does myself, my own sense of well-being, a world of good. Just love being with the family. We've got 2 kids. I say kids, one's 18, one's 15, growing up fast. Love going to the theatre, love music. My background was music. So grateful both our kids are musical. Claire's very musical. So,
yes, it is nice that we are near enough that we can go to London theatres as well. So we've been trying to do more of that.
Yeah.
And galleries, art galleries. I mean, Steve's right. We are, so a lot of my time that's taken up outside of my work, Steve's obviously pastor, so church stuff is his job, but it's not my paid employment. But I head up our worship team, so I am quite heavily involved in the music side of things. And while that is, I mean, it's a role I do, but it's also a love I have. So I've spent quite a lot of time doing that as well.
So as worship pastor then, what song at the moment is particularly capturing the hearts of your congregation?
Oh, wow. Unexpected question. What was the song that we did yesterday? Promises.
Promises, yeah.
It's talking about God's faithfulness. Yeah.
Great with your faithfulness to me, yeah.
I would say that probably.
And Holy Forever was another one that's been really touching people. Yeah.
Wonderful. And do you guys sort of downtime? Are you TV watchers? Or most authors say I'm an author, so I love reading books. Do you read loads of books, or how do you relax?
I do read a lot of books, but again, that's for work because I run the Women Alive book club. So I am doing a lot of that for that purposes, and I also write a children's book column for the Trade magazine together. So I'm doing a lot of that. So I do love reading books for pleasure, but I very, very rarely get to do that because I have a huge to read pile for work. But
I'm quite similar.
Yeah.
With my podcast, I've got a massive pile to read for that. But yeah. Sorry, carry on.
Our kids love watching TV with us.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that came out of lockdown when you're kind of thrust together and not a lot else you could do. They've started getting into things like Bake Off. Our son really likes Dragon's Den, so we've been watching through some old episodes.
Dragon's Den, very good.
Yeah, there's some things. It's quite a nice family thing that we do together.
I think he's a budding entrepreneur, really.
My children are much younger than yours. I'm all sort of primary school age, and the new series of Gladiators that's just come on TV. Oh, they absolutely love Gladiators. Goodness.
We haven't gone there yet because we remember the first one. We're like, I wasn't particularly a fan the first time. I've got so many friends who keep saying to them, you need to watch it. And I'm holding off.
Yeah, resisting.
Wonderful. Have you got anything coming up soon? I know, Claire, you've written several books. Steve, is this your one and only foray into writing, or have you got something else you're thinking of?
I never say never, but no, I was kind of dragged kicking and screaming to write this one, and praise God, our marriage held up through it. That was another challenge, another test. We have very different approaches to organisation. Namely, Claire is organised and I'm not. So, yeah, she was incredibly gracious in waiting for me to actually...
So your short answer is no, but that wasn't going to happen.
Never say never.
He writes 2,500 words every week, every time he preaches. So he is, although he said that's quite funny as well, because he chose his A-levels, anything that wasn't essay-based, and now is having to write.
I do a lot of writing.
And I used to edit them when he first started, and he's absolutely brilliant. He doesn't need anything like that now. So actually, he could very easily write more. So who knows? Right. I have got a book just about, should probably be out by the time this airs. I've been working with Care for the Family on a bereavement guide, actually, called The Grief Journey. So it's quite a short book, and it's really to come alongside people in those first few months after losing someone. So that, and I've started working on a new book on Lament, which I don't know quite how long that's going to take me. It's been on my heart for quite a few years because it's been quite a painful journey over the last few years, and it has made me start thinking much more about it. And I've recently said to my publisher, it feels like it's time. So I'm at the very beginning of that process.
Oh, good. Lots of things to look forward to. That's wonderful. Now, where can people buy this book or any of your other books, Claire? And indeed, have you got websites and things we can point people towards and social media so they can find you and all that kind of thing?
Yes. I just went to check. I've not done it very well because all of them are different, which is really unhelpful. I can't just say everything, but that my web page is clairemusters.com. So Claire has got an I and an E in it. And that has got our marriage book on it and Taking Off the Mask. A lot of my other books I did through Waverley Abbeys. So they used to be CWR. So they stock those. But yes, I'm on Facebook as Claire Musters Writer. I'm on Instagram as Claire Musters and on Twitter as C Musters. Twitter now. I still call it Twitter. I can't get my head around X. So yes, if you want to find out a bit more about Steve, you kind of have to do it through me because he stays off of social media, apart from through church.
Well, that's great. I imagine your other social medias and things you can get to from your website.
Yeah. Yes.
So what we'll do for the benefit of our listeners is we'll put a link to your website in this episode's show notes. And then if people want to get in touch or follow you or find a book, whatever, they can click on that and it'll take them wherever they want to go.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your life with us. It's been a privilege. Thank you. And if you've been listening to this and you would like to know more, I mean, there's so much more good stuff in the book that Claire and Steve have written and called Grace-Filled Marriage. Do go and get yourself a copy. And I've been fortunate enough to be given a copy to help me prepare for this podcast. And what I'll be doing, like I do with a lot of the books I have, is I give them away. So if you are wanting to win a copy of Grace-Filled Marriage in my monthly giveaway, please do tune in. I don't think you can tune into a newsletter. Sign up for my newsletter, which you can find over on my website, mattmcclery.com. And once a month, there's a wonderful book giveaway in there that you can enter. And Grace-Filled Marriage is going to be coming up in a few months' time. So do keep a lookout for that. A big thank you to Claire and Steve for joining me today. It's been wonderful having you on the show.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to chat to you.
Well, and another really big thank you goes out to the St. Andrews Literature Festival, who has sponsored today's episode. Thanks for your support, guys. Thank you so much. And don't forget that this is an inaugural Christian Literature Festival that is starting in Great Missenden here in the UK on the 21st and the 22nd of June. So pop over to their website, stalitfest.co.uk, to grab your tickets and to find out more. I'm going to be popping over on the Saturday, so you never know, we might bump into each other if you come along. So grab your tickets now, stalitfest.co.uk, and I look forward to seeing you there. And thank you as well for listening to this episode of Christian Book Blurb. Don't forget, we come out twice a month on the 1st and the 15th. So do join me again really soon for another edition of Christian Book Blurb. Goodbye and see you soon. Thanks for listening to Christian Book Blurb with your host, Matt McChlery. Do give it a like, give it a share, and let your friends know all about it. We do hope to see you again soon on another Christian Book Blurb.